Hello and welcome to Quite Contrary Flower Farm. We are about to do our September farm walk. It's the first Sunday in September and we finished a beautiful sunny windy week with a heap of rain, so you'll see just how wet it is at the moment. We're pretty up to date on all of our farm tasks at the moment because I've been on the farm for 2 weeks, as I'm sure many Victorians are aware, but we won't go into that too much. So we'll just see what's happened since our last farm walk at the start of August. So the peony patch has continued to have a little bit of work. We've covered all of our paths with weed mat just to keep the grass out. Over time we'll replace this with mulch, but that's probably a next year job at this point because we're about to get very busy. So that's just keeping this area manageable. We did weed this whole area 2 weeks ago and we've already got new grass and things coming up again, so this needs a new weed, but there's no point doing it on a wet day because the weeds just reroot. So we'll do that next time we get a sunny day. We've had really good luck with all of our peonies, including the ones that we transplanted from our vegetable beds. I think we've lost maybe 2, or there's 2 that haven't come up out of the 100 and I think it ended up being about 110 plants that we put in. So that's really good odds. Some of them, as you can see from this one, are really big. This is a new root that probably came from VDQ bulbs at a guess, and they're already getting some buds on them. In their first year after a transplant, you don't want your peonies to flower too much, but I want to check what varieties we've actually got and make sure that they're all in the right spot. So I'll pinch off all of the buds except for 1 on each plant. Each plant can have 1 flower if they flower, just to let me know what we've got out here. But yeah, otherwise, peony patch, so far so good. The trial rose garden is going well. Most of these are going into their 2nd year with us. You can see the climbers are all starting to climb again, very green. They're even putting buds on, which seems pretty early. This area was mulched, I think it was last month, but I have to come along and tidy up all the edges before the capeweed gets in and put on more mulch because the chickens love to come through here and kick everything everywhere. So we just have to keep adding mulch until it's really thick to help stop the chickens. All of the new bare root roses that went in last month, so they've been in for 4 or 5 weeks now, have been putting on really good new growth. We finished mulching all of them this month, and once again we've covered all the paths just to make life a little bit easier. This was weed mat that was down last year in between the dahlias, so we're getting another good year out of it. We like to reuse all our plastics whenever we can. I think every rose that was transplanted last month has taken, so I don't think we've lost any at all. So that's been really good. The rain has helped these guys, keeping them nice and moist while they establish their roots. Yeah, so hopefully we'll get some flowers on these soon. Probably not till November, but I'll keep you up to date. Our foxgloves are putting on really good growth at the moment, but they're growing pretty inconsistently. We've got some on one side that are getting really big and heaps of leaves, and some on the other side that aren't doing quite as well. I suspect it has something to do with the slightly uneven ground. Even though this is where we're elevated, and so it's not as wet here, I think there's one part in particular that might be catching a bit more rain than everything else, and I think it's just drowning the foxgloves. So I'll show you that. But generally they're coming on really well, pretty happy with them. So through here is the patch that I'm worried about. You can see that most through here have died. I have caught ducks pulling them out, and the chickens obviously wreak a little bit of havoc, but not too bad, or not enough to explain why this area is so much worse than everywhere else. So I think because the ground comes down and then it rises just a little bit. I think the water's getting stuck here and that's just drowning everything. Yeah, so we'll just have to try and flatten that out before we replant these beds with anything else next year. Little ranunculus patch is coming along really well. Again, size is pretty inconsistent, but it seems to be between varieties and not necessarily where things are planted. The ranunculus that were planted from seed have grown heaps since the days have started getting a little bit longer and a little bit warmer. And the white variety in particular, I think it's Elegance White and it's got a number, but it's actually started to put up buds at the exact same time as our corn-grown ranunculus. So it might just be a matter of different colours flower at slightly different times, but we'll just keep an eye on that and just record the data so we know for next year. We have a few flowers coming along with them and the stem length seems to be pretty good, but next year I think I would put them under cover just to try and get them flowering a little bit earlier. If we could get a few weeks earlier and a little bit longer, that would be really good from this crop. So these are the white ranunculus that have been grown from seed, and you can see the stems are pretty good. They're pretty thick, pretty long, pretty tall, so pretty happy with how those are coming along. This little patch here, these were all grown from corms from various places, and you can see the flowers are a little bit more advanced and they have a lot more green growth, but actually the stems seem like they're going to be a little bit shorter than those grown from seed. So that could also be different varieties. These are, I think these ones are the French ranunculus, whereas everything else is Italian, so they're slightly different in their growth habits, but we'll only know once we really start harvesting and have a good comparison rate. These are the anemones. They started off okay, but their stems have all been really short, and I don't know if that's because of the varieties that we picked or because of the way we grew them. Again, next year I would probably try to put these under cover. And the other thing that I did was I pulled the weed mat off this section because they kept getting stuck under it, and we were also expecting really hot days, and anemones do not like hot days, so I just wanted to save them from that. So next year I wouldn't use weed mat and I would put them under frost cloth or plastic, again to try and get the earlier production, the longer stems and the better quality of flowers. So we finished pruning our David Austins last month, and this month I mulched them all, and we gave them a bit of a fertiliser because they started putting on their leafy growth. We use sudden impact for roses by the instructions basically. It's a really good product from Nutrog, and the roses seem to really like it. They're all putting on lots of leafy growth, really happy with how they're developing. They should start flowering in November. So the greenhouse has had quite a few changes. Most of the seeds that would have been in here last month are now out in the field, and we've started a whole lot more seeds. So we have everything from a few more sort of hardy annuals that I'm going to try and get a third succession in of. So there's some phlox, some snapdragons, some larkspur status, a little bit of nigella that should be direct sown, but I didn't have the space ready, so I didn't do it that way, and some straw flower and feverfew. So they're what's going out in the next planting. They're getting a lot bigger, so we've got probably 2 more weeks before those go out. And then we've also started all of our warm season or tender annuals, or most of them. So they're our zinnias, our cosmos, China asters are the main ones. I haven't started any of my celosia yet. I don't know where I'm going to put it because I'm running out of space, so that might be in 2 weeks once things start going out. We brought in all of the chrysanthemums that we did have in bulb crates. They've all been potted up just so we can look after them a little bit better. And we've brought in all of our dahlia tubers that we're going to take cuttings from. Some of them are on heat mats, most of them aren't. And I've got my dahlia seeds also on the heat mats. So we're hoping to get about 1,000 seedlings this year, but it might not happen. We have to just wait on the germination on those ones and see what we end up with. But that's the aim, 1,000 seedlings. So I'll get you to come in closer and we can have a look at the dahlias. Okay, this is my bounty of tubers that I got from Florally Seasonal Flowers. So that's Lauralee Merton over in Ballarat. These are the ones that are on the heat mat because these are the ones that I'm giving special attention to because I really want these ones to do well. They've started, well, they came with really great eyes firstly. They were great tubers. And so they've started sprouting some of them already, but I'm just keeping them a bit warmer to speed up the process. These are the tubers that we brought out from our collection that we want to take cuttings of to increase our stock of them. So we've got a lot of Cafe, Florally Cafe Violette, Coral Isle, just the ones that we bought in last year that we only had 1 or 2 of, that we'd like to take from sort of 8 or 10 tubers up to 30 to 50. The cafes I started on the heat mat before they got kicked off, and you can see that they've put on much faster, greener growth than everything else. Everything else is only sort of just starting to get their eyes going, so they'll be a bit behind. So the heat definitely does help. So we're out in the flower field and I'll take you through the crops and how they're all progressing. But we got this is our second zone, our second planting of cold hardy annuals. We got all that planted out this past month. We've mulched all the sweet peas. The sweet peas are really starting to climb. And we even have a few buds turning up on a few of our flowers. So hopefully this month we'll be able to actually start cutting and selling things. This is our calendula patch. It started flowering, as you can see, a few weeks ago, and I went through and deadheaded everything on Friday. We have to keep pinching this because it's just not putting out long stems. It's supposed to be a cutting variety, but at the moment we couldn't really sell it for anything useful, even though the colours are really beautiful. So we're just going to keep pinching them out and see what happens. These are the sweet peas that were direct sown on Mother's Day weekend. So I mulched them with sugarcane mulch just to try and keep some of the weeds down. And as you can see, they're starting to climb. So we're tying those on as they go because they just put on better growth when you keep them up off the ground. But some of them aren't quite long enough yet to get there. So what I would do next year is I just plant them a little bit closer to the trellis. We just went a little bit far away because we weren't really sure where the trellis was going to be because we hadn't put it up yet. So next year I would put the trellis in first and then place the sweet peas based on where the trellis is. But that will be easier now that we've got the infrastructure ready. This is the Nigella or Love in a Mist patch. It's growing. I've got a big bald patch here. Can you see that? Where some birds went through and basically just chopped off my Nigella. Nothing we can really do about that, unfortunately, but it's growing, it's just doing its own thing, and we'll just see when it flowers. This is our cornflower or bachelor buttons patch. For the longest time my husband kept asking if this was my weed patch because it was the only thing that would grow, and we all know I'm really good at growing weeds around the farm. Very exciting. It's been putting up lots of buds recently, and I've been watching this one, waiting for it to flower for about 2 weeks, and it finally has. So that's really good. The colour's really beautiful, so I'm really happy with how this patch is going. Just after I'd started the seeds for all of these, everyone told me what a nightmare they are to harvest. So we'll be experiencing that for the first time. Hoping it's not as bad as everyone says, but we'll just see how they go. I'm really excited to see these going. These are some of our snapdragons, but these are the ones that are closest to flowering. If you can see the buds on these ones, they're really starting to come along. So these are a winter or early variety is in this bed. Snapdragons are daylight sensitive, so they'll flower better under different conditions. and even if you plant them all at the same time, they'll have slightly staggered flowering. So these ones will come on first and then followed by the others. But they've got really beautiful long straight stems at the moment, so really happy with how this crop's coming along, and can't wait to actually see them bloom and get to start picking. It's been a long wait. I think these were started in March, was probably when we sowed the seeds for these. So yeah, it's really nice to see things actually start producing. This is our straw flower patch. We pinched all of these this last month to get some lateral shoots, and we've added support to everything in this zone over the last month too. You can see this one's a little bit loose, so I'll have to come along and tighten that up to give them the best support possible. But yeah, they're just coming along. They look really healthy, and they'll just keep on keeping on. So this is our second planting zone. You can literally see the water running across it at the moment. It's like walking on cake batter in here under the weed mat. I can feel it all shifting around. Next year we are going to work on our drainage even more. We thought that having the drain down each side would fix it. Obviously it hasn't, so we're going to add yet another drain, a French drain, which we'll go into more detail later, down the whole middle of the field, just to avoid this sort of stuff happening, because it's not really good for the soil, it's not good for the plants, and it makes it really hard to work in here. So that's another bit of infrastructure that we'll be working on. In the meantime, everything that we put in here seems to have transplanted really well, and seems to be growing on. They look really small, but they were put in very small because most of what's gone in here doesn't love to be transplanted, so I wanted to do it as early as possible when there wasn't as much risk of it getting the really bad root disturbance. So we've got larkspur, a bed of poppies, some rudbeckia, feverfew, a bit of stock, more snapdragons, more scabiosa, auroch, dara, and a lot of status, as well as our 2 sweet pea beds up the front. So this zone is pretty much done and settled. I'm not doing as much support out here because what we're growing doesn't grow as tall. So yeah, this zone's done. We're just going to leave this now, keep on top of the weeds that come up through the holes, but otherwise we're just going to wait until this is ready to harvest. These are my poor phlox beds. You can see I added a bigger drain to try and keep the water away from them, and it's just filled up as well, and the water is moving pretty quickly out of here, but it can only do so much. So hopefully a few dry days, and this will dry out enough that they'll be okay. I'm really only worried about the ones right on the edge, but most of them should be okay because they'll still have a bit of their roots above the water. It shouldn't be too waterlogged. But there's not much we can do at this point. We've got drains, the water's moving, that's just farming. But in good news, this is our next zone of planting. This is where the third lot of hardy annuals are going to go out in hopefully about 2 weeks' time. I've set this area up completely underneath the tarp, so our irrigation is ready to be connected when we put our system in. The weed mat's been burned and laid, and we've mapped it out, but at the moment I wouldn't be able to move this tarp because it is weighed down by hundreds of kilos of water. So hopefully a few dry days that'll take care of that, and then we'll be able to get planting in here. The other big change to the layout of the flower field this month is that we've set out our zones for our first and second summer plantings, which will happen at around about the same time. So the first lot will go into this bed, and they're the seedlings that you would have seen in the greenhouse, so the zinnias, the cosmos, and the China asters, as well as the celosia that I'll start soon. They'll be planted out as transplants probably in mid-October. Our last frost is usually around about the 1st of October. Or what usually happens here is we have a September that is warm and beautiful and lovely, and we think to ourselves, oh, we should really get those flowers out in the field, and then the start of October hits and we have a cold snap that would kill everything if we planted it in September. So we're waiting until mid-October, letting the soil warm up a little bit, and then we will plant out here. So hopefully by the end of the month it will have dried enough that I can get my little tractor in here to start setting up those beds, so that when the seedlings are ready to go out, the beds are ready for them, because we don't want the seedlings sitting in those trays for too long, because it's not good for the plants, and then that means we don't get as good of flowers on the other end. But at the same time, we'll be setting up this zone of beds, because for things like zinnias, they're much better when they can be direct sown. So for our next succession that we'll have coming on after October, that will go into these beds. So we'll need those set up ready when we plant out the first succession, so that we can get those started and going. So they're ready to flower when the first lot are getting tired. Okay, this, where I'm standing right now, will be about the midway point of our dahlia patch. As you can see, we're going to have to do something about the drainage here, because if this were to happen in April or May, it would drown all of our dahlias. So we will build them up a little bit, but we haven't seen the water sitting up this end of the field like this almost ever, because this is the highest point of the field. So usually it flows off here into the drains. So that was why we picked this area for our dahlias, was because it doesn't get as wet, and now we're going to have to rethink that plan. So we might get some dirt and dump it on top. They will be a little bit raised, just because of the way we form our beds, but yeah, if this happened in April, that probably wouldn't be enough to save them. But the other thing we'll do is we'll just monitor how fast the water drains, because if it does drain within 24 hours, that's probably going to be okay, or it's going to be much better than it would be if it sits here for 48, 72 hours. That's enough to rot dahlia tubers. So this month we obviously measured the space, and then I ran my tiller through the soil just a little bit to loosen it up. We have planted a green manure crop, and I was able to see the starts of that, but now I don't know if it's going to be drowned or not, so we'll just hang tight and see what happens with the green manure crop. It was a bit of experiment anyway, because we didn't really have a whole lot of time before we need to start tilling this area and forming the beds so we can tarp them before we plant our dahlias. But that's, yeah, it's just going to be what it'll be at this point. Yeah. Thank you for joining us on our very wet September walk around. Hopefully things will be a little bit drier next month and a little bit different, with a lot more flowers to show you. If this has been interesting, feel free to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you want to know anything else, and you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at QC Flower Farm. See you next month.